Well, hello, this is Stephanie Ford at Binkley Baptist Church. I'm Minister of Christian Formation here, and I've been on live stream before, but we are gathering for our Wednesday night program on Tuesday night, and we have just eaten, so I'm going to offer a blessing for our food and for our world. Loving God, we give thanks that you are nearer to us than our breath, and that you're moving in every moment so that your creation might thrive. And so today we give thanks for the food that we've gotten to eat from that same bountiful creation. And we give thanks for Katey Zeh coming to speak to us about caring for women at a difficult place in their lives and how we can be actively supporting them all over the world. And that's not only women, but teens. And so we pray that we would learn how to pursue justice for this population. In Jesus' name, amen. And for the viewers at home, I want you to know her book, A Complicated Choice, Katey Zeh's book, is available at Flyleaf Books. And they're giving a 10% discount, so I hope you will take advantage of our local bookstore. And I'm just going to read what it has on the book jacket. Katey Zeh is an ordained Baptist minister, and by the way, she's a member at Pullen, our sister church, and she's CEO of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. She is author of the book Women Rise Up, and co-host of the Kindreds podcast. The Center for American Progress named her one of their top justice-seeking faith leaders to watch, and she's a member of Planned Parenthood's Clergy Advocacy Board. Zeh has written for many outlets, including the Huffington Post, Sojourners, Fidelia's Sisters, Religion News Service, Rewire, and Religion Dispatches. And her advocacy work has been featured in the Washington Post, The Nation, and Vice News. And she lives with her family in North Carolina. So welcome, Katey. We're glad you're here.
That's actually my copy of my book, which I don't even think I'll read from. I think it's more of a comfort object for me to have it. Thank you so much. I'm going to adjust this back up. It's so good to be with you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being willing to engage in sacred conversations about a topic that is deeply personal and can be very difficult and emotional. And I recognize that in this space that I'm talking about us. I'm not talking about people out there. I'm talking about us, because everybody loves someone who's had an abortion, even if we don't know it. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for having me, for inviting me to come. This is the first in a long kind of book tour that I'm on. I'm going to back to my alma mater tomorrow, Davidson College, to lecture in humanities about the future of reproductive rights. I'll be doing a book signing at Main Street Books, and then the next week I'm going to South Carolina to a Lutheran church to do a similar kind of thing. And it's just really amazing. The silver lining of the moment that we're in is that people want to talk about this. Folks like me have been talking about it for a long time, and it's just so, it gives me some hope that there are folks who want to engage in these conversations at this time. Okay, so I am a Baptist minister. That is something that surprised me. I never thought I would be a minister, for one, and I never thought I would be a Baptist either. It just kind of happened, and since I'm in a Baptist church, I can share a little bit about it, because I think it's funny how it happened. I didn't grow up going to church at all. My dad was raised Christian Scientist, and my mom was raised Southern Baptist. They both had their own religious trauma, even though I don't think either of them knows what that means, but they definitely did. And so it wasn't until my maternal grandmother, who I called Honey, got terminally ill and wanted to go back to church, like a lot of folks do as they're at the end of their lives. And that was this time that I got to spend with my Honey by myself, because I had two older brothers, and I was like, well, I can sit through church if it means that I get I get time with my honey. It was a United Methodist Church. And after she died, I continued going to church mostly as a way to stay connected to her. But I also had this amazing experience of being able to explore the life of Jesus as someone who had not been forced to learn about it. And I just found him intriguing. And so church became more than just a connection to my grandmother. It became a place of belonging and community for me. And I was also very steeped in conservative, white, Southern evangelicalism. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I started my deconstruction journey about 20 years ago. Actually, my first class at Davidson was a religion class, and that opened up a whole world for me to realize that there were lots of different ways to be faithful. There were lots of different ways to follow this person, Jesus, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. So I stayed United Methodist, and I went to seminary, and I decided I wasn't going to get ordained because the United Methodist system is so incredibly challenging. I thought I'll be a seminary-trained layperson because the world needs more of those people, I think. And eventually, because of the way the United Methodist Church not only discriminated against LGBTQ people and continues to, but also rescinded its support for reproductive justice officially in 2016, I think, I decided I could no longer be part of that system. And was kind of done, honestly, with church for a while. And people had told me about this place called Pullen. I'm like, well, it's a Baptist church. Methodists have this thing about Baptists. I don't know how I feel about that. And so my first Sunday, I went and fell in love with Nancy Petty and everybody. And I sat down next to this lovely couple, and the woman clearly knew that we were new, and she said, "Oh, is this your first time here?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I feel kind of weird because I'm United Methodist, and this is Baptist church. And she goes, "Well, honey, I'm Jewish." And I was like, okay, I'm going to get over myself, because if there's a Jewish person here, then I can get over my United Methodist snobbery. And really that community just embraced my call, because I had been doing this work of advocating for reproductive health rights and justice for a long time at that point. And it wasn't until a friend asked me if I would do her wedding that I was like, well, maybe I should actually think about being ordained, because I really do feel like the work that I'm doing is ordained ministry. And Pullen agreed and blessed that and ordained me to this work in the world. And I feel so incredibly fortunate for them being able to understand what is a very complicated and beautiful ministry path, and for them to give me their support as I do this work. So that's a little bit more background on my Baptist identity than most people get. So thank you for having me here. So I am the CEO of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, or RCRC as I will probably call it, and I did put some materials in the back for you to learn a little bit more about what we do and some of the resources that we have. But I always like to talk about what has already come up this evening with one person about the clergy consultation service on abortion. Have any of you all heard of this before? Only one. So this is one of my favorite pieces of religious history to share, because it's almost like a forgotten piece of our history. But in the years prior to Roe versus Wade, there were clergy starting in New York City, but expanded into 38 states that helped people get access to safe abortion care. They had referral networks. Sometimes the secretaries of the clergy would pretend that they were pregnant and go to providers and make sure that they were reputable and that they were going to take care of the patients who came. It was a huge operation, and strategically private and also strategically public. At one point, many of these clergy actually took out a front page ad in the New York Times talking about their support and their work. So it was a really incredibly powerful network of clergy and faith leaders who were active in those years, 1967 to 1973. 38 states helped about 500,000 people. Just take that in. And we don't know about it, right? Like, I always talk about what's happened, and we can get more into that. But I think it's just really important to know that people of faith, religious leaders, spiritual people have always made sure that people who need access to abortion care, reproductive health care in general, have done it. There's nothing new about that. It's just sometimes we forget. So I think it's always important to talk about that legacy After Roe versus Wade, that group formed what was in the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights, or RCAR, and that was formed by some of the denominational bodies that the clergy had come from. And it's a lot of the folks that you would think, pretty broad coalition of Jewish, Protestant, and Unitarian traditions. And even at the time, the Southern Baptist Convention was supportive of the Roe versus Wade decision. You can go read it. And many of the mainline Protestant denominations and Jewish ones have always been supportive. So it's always one of those things like, how did we get here? And maybe I'll get back to the history piece. I talk about it in the book, but I want to talk more about how I got involved, because I think story is so important. It's so much a part of who we are as human beings, and certainly as Christians too. So when I went to Yale Divinity School out of college, because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, I quickly figured out I was a little bit tired of the classroom, because I was really eager to figure out how was I going to apply what I was learning about theology and the Bible and ethics in the world. And I was just really hungry for that. I didn't want to be in my head all the time. And so, the organization I now run, RCRC, was coming to campus, and they were going to provide a one-day, all-day training on pastoral care for all options, meaning people who are coming with spiritual questions about what to do about a pregnancy. They're not sure. And I'm like, this is perfect. This is exactly the kind of thing that I want to do. And so I signed up, and it was incredibly powerful, because I knew that I was pro-choice, but I never really investigated what that meant. I never really interrogated it. It was just kind of something I took as a given. But I never really thought about what my values around that were, how that connected to my faith, what were some of the judgments that I had. And that training really allowed me to work through, some of those things in a very practical way. And when the training was done, I said, well, I actually want to use these things. I mean, I've been to so many trainings that you go and you get the little certificate and then maybe never use again. Like, no, I really want to do this. I really want to provide this kind of care. And so I met up with a fellow student, and we thought we had this great idea. We were going to start a hotline for people who wanted to call and just talk about their experiences. Judgment-free, would be anonymous. That was a beautiful idea, and we didn't really think about how the abortion clinics in the area were going to feel about that. Because think about their experiences with Christian people. They're the people who stand outside their clinics and protest. And so we figured out we really need to be building relationships with the clinics and let them know who we are and what it is we were trying to do, and build some trust, understandably so. And I really clicked with one of the clinic managers, and she said, maybe just come have a tour at the clinic. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. I've never been inside an abortion clinic before, and if I'm going to provide care to people, I should probably have a little bit better understanding what it is they go through. So I was not thinking about this, but as I drove up, and I talk about this in the book, as I drove up, I was perceived as someone there to have an abortion. Obviously, like I was there on an abortion day. And I'm pulling into my car, and all the protesters are trying to get me to stop. When I get out of my car, they're yelling at me, saying horrible things, holding up disgusting signs. And it felt like eternity for me to get from my car to inside. And I remember thinking, I just want them to know that I'm not here to have an abortion. Not everybody who comes in these doors is here to have an abortion. And I realized later that why did I care? Why did I care what they thought of me or why I was there? I felt shame and stigma, just a little glimmer of what people feel, what the staff feel, what the doctors feel, what the patients feel every single day walking in. So it would be later that I would start to kind of unravel that. But once I was inside, I had the most beautiful experience. I was so, you hear things about what happens in abortion clinics, and I saw for myself, at least in this one, just beautiful care. So much compassion, so much patience, love, attention, really journeying with people through, making sure that they felt good about their decision, giving them options, giving them all the information that they needed. I was so blown away by that I decided after the tour that I actually wanted to come back and volunteer every week, because I could see that there were some things that I could do. And mostly I stayed in the recovery room and helped people get saltines and ginger ale after their procedures and stuff like that. But then one day, one of the nurses or someone had not shown up. They were down a staff person. And they said, Katey, could you come into the procedure room? Like, there's a reason that I did not pursue pre-med at Davidson. Like, I don't know how I feel about that, but it was one of those, if not me, then who situations. And I'm like, well, they need someone, so yeah, I'll do it. And at that point, I'd been there for a while. And it was the most awkward, sacred experience. Is the only way I can describe it, because I'm standing there holding the hands of these patients, total strangers. Holding someone's hand is very intimate during this very vulnerable moment in their lives. And that was all I needed to do, and it was actually comforting. It was like I was just offering my awkward presence, and that was enough. And it honestly transformed me. I'm like, okay, the people outside are the Christian people yelling, and here's the ministry, here's the sacred work. Like, I have to figure out how to bridge these things. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes even now. It was so transformative for me. You know, and on the days when I get a lot of hate mail, I just remember that moment. I remember those moments because that's why I do it. It's not to fight with people about politics. It's about caring for people. And for me, I'm like, if ministry is anything, it is that. It is journeying alongside people during their darkest moments. And, you know, a lot of times people ask me this really, I think, problematic question, which is like, well, how do you, sorry, I'm getting snarky. I was TikToking about this last week. How do you justify what you do with the Bible? How do you do that? And I'm like, well, first of all, abortion's not really talked about in the scriptures, and the stuff that's there is actually pretty pro-abortion, honestly, and not exactly the ethic that I would want to live by. But if I must answer the question, which I think is problematic because we shouldn't go digging into the sacred text looking for justification for what we do, there's one story that, for me, tells me everything that I need to know, and it's the gospel story of the hemorrhaging woman, which is a story that I have studied and I have read so many times. I actually wrote about it in my first book, and then I never thought about it in this context. But for me, it really is a reproductive healing story. Maybe the only one that we have. If you can think of others, please let me know, because I would love to talk about that. But just so we remember this story, this woman has been bleeding for 12 years. We know she's bleeding. This is a gynecological issue. This is a reproductive issue that she has. And she has used all of her money seeing all the doctors who say that they can make her well, and all they've done is make her poorer and made her condition worse. And she's ostracized because of the laws at the time. She wouldn't have been able to move about her community freely because of this issue of blood that she has. And then she hears about this healer who's coming through her community named Jesus. And really, she shouldn't be there. She shouldn't be in the community. She shouldn't be in a crowd. She shouldn't be touching anybody. But she knows, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I'll be made well. I'll be healed. And I just love this scene of her like trying to be so inconspicuous and taking up as little room as possible and like doing the most minor thing she can, you know, to touch the hem of his garment down low. But it's so powerful, like Jesus stops because he feels something happen in his body. And I just love that. I love that there's this moment where this healing story where the woman is the catalyst for her own healing. Jesus doesn't even know what happened. She is the catalyst for her own healing. She knows what she needs. She reaches out in faith. And Jesus needs to know about it because I think it actually changes him and expands his ministry, which we don't talk about very much. So I love that moment of him saying, "Who touched me?" And of course, the disciples are like, "Jesus, everyone's touching you." But he knows there's a specific touch that he experienced. And I love this too, because the woman did not have to come back and say anything. She got her healing. She got her physical healing. Because it says in that moment that she's made well. The bleeding has stopped. She can tell in her body. But what I've learned about healing is that it's not linear. Do you all resonate with that? Like, healing is like a cycle. It's a spiral. And it deepens, and like we keep coming back around. And her healing is more, what she needs healing from is not just the physical suffering. It is her whole life. It is everything that the trauma that she's dealt with, the social trauma, the financial trauma, the relationship trauma probably. And so I love this moment where she is terrified, but she she reaches out in faith again and tells Jesus her whole story. And, you know, I always focused on that part, that she's having this conversation with Jesus, but then it wasn't until I was thinking about it in the context of this, of who else would have heard the story, because it's not only Jesus and this woman, and it's a crowd of people, and as she's talking, there are others who hear it. You know, and I was thinking, like, who are those other people? The disciples, yeah, for one, but also maybe some of the doctors who would have made her worse. Maybe some of the people who have ostracized her because of her bleeding. Maybe other people with similar conditions who are just longing to be made well. And I think there's something about her willingness to tell her whole story, tell the whole truth, that heals not only her, but actually catalyzes the healing for others. And I think that that's why when I wrote my book, I wanted it to be an abortion storytelling book, because in telling the story is how we heal ourselves and we heal each other. So that's a little bit about how I enter this work. And for me, like, I don't care if you don't like that justification. I've had dudes come up to me and say, I'm not going to preach on that. That's not a strong enough argument for this. I'm like, well, you clearly have an issue with women's power, so I don't know what to tell you. Jesus didn't have a problem with it. So, you know, at a certain point, especially in this kind of work, you just have to say, look, I know what my calling is. I'm standing in my truth. If you don't like it, well, too bad. I'm feeling punchy today. I think it's because, did you all see that Lindsey Graham, it's just, this work is so tiring sometimes. This national abortion ban, which I knew was going to happen. Of course, that is their playbook, but it's just exhausting some days. Some days you just want to have your talk planned out and not have it be interrupted by Lindsey Graham. Absolutely. So you all know that Roe versus Wade was overturned over the summer, which has kicked back abortion rights to the states to decide. So we've seen states that had laws already on the books called trigger laws, that once it was overturned, either abortion was illegal immediately or soon thereafter. Not all the states have implemented their trigger laws yet, but they are, and it's creating a huge public health crisis for people who are trying to access care. Sometimes even things that are not sometimes related reproductive care that requires abortion medications or procedures that people are being denied. So today, Lindsey Graham, and I think Chris Smith, too, from New Jersey, one of my favorites, introduced a bill that would be a 15-week abortion ban, a national abortion ban in the Senate. And, you know, of course people say, well, you know, it doesn't have any hope of passing. Well, that's not why they're introducing the legislation. It's in part because of November, but also because now it's been introduced, they will continue to bring this legislation up until they are successful. So we cannot feel any solace in knowing that they can't pass it right now, because they will continue to. This has always been the game plan, and it will not stop there either. But if you didn't see, that is what's happened today. And you heard, like, well, you know, it's better for it to be a states' rights issue. That was a lie, too. This has always been about making abortion illegal and perhaps contraception and so on and so on. There's a lot at stake here. So we're talking about the political moment that we're in, and I want to get back to that. And also, what time are we finishing up? I want to make sure we have time for questions. Okay, so I'll make sure that we have some time for questions too. So I don't think I need to tell you too much about the political moment that we're in. Maybe if you have specific questions, I can answer them. But also just recognizing a little bit about how we got here, because I was talking about, you know, we have this robust clergy consultation service on abortion before Roe. We've got all of this public support for abortion. Like, what happened? And I think it's important to realize, and some of you probably already know this, that it's never been about abortion. Abortion became a way for a political voting bloc. And I talk about this in my book too. I keep referencing it because this is where so much of my knowledge is right now. But there's a historian named Dr. Gillian Frank who explained this to me, that when Richard Nixon was up for re-election during a time of expanding civil rights that had a lot of white conservative people real upset, what they found was that capitalizing on people's like moral ambivalence about abortion and the way that it was showing up now in their communities, because now abortion was out front and center. There were clinics, like people could see that that this was happening in their communities. People were feeling some kind of way about it. And what the Richard Nixon re-election campaign discovered is that they could get Catholics, evangelicals, and Mormons together. Now, those groups don't agree on anything theologically. Think about it. They don't want to talk to each other about theology, but they share a love for misogyny and racism and homophobia. And so they made abortion one of the kind of like dog whistle issues during that time as a way to get that voting bloc together to win the election. And it has been successful ever since. So what I always tell people is no matter how you feel about this issue, I want you to understand that it has always been a political instrument and that Christianity has been weaponized throughout that time, to use abortion to win elections, and it has been incredibly successful. We can talk more about that, but I think it's just important to realize it's never been purely, some Catholics have always been anti-abortion, but in general, it was not a controversial thing until it became politically salient to be anti-abortion. Again, you all probably knew some of that. So I've just shared a bunch of, discouraging things. And so kind of where are we now? And I know we're going to have a smaller conversation about what we can do, but I want to talk about that with everybody since we're together. And people are often asking me, like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? So the beautiful thing about where we are now versus the 60s is that there have been folks who have been making sure that people get access to reproductive health care for a long time. Because Roe was never the ceiling. It was always the floor we talk about. It did not ensure that everybody who needs access to abortion care could get it. Because right after Roe, we have what was the Hyde Amendment that kept anyone on Medicaid from getting access to abortion care. That's going to impact poor people. We have, abortion restrictions and waiting periods and young people having to get parental notification if they wanted to get an abortion. All kinds of things that disproportionately impact Black folks, Indigenous folks, young folks, queer folks, immigrant folks. That has always been true. And so there's this network of abortion funds that have been operating for a long time because there's always been a need to make sure we're getting really mutual aid, care together to get people where they need to go and with the resources that they need to get the care. And so we already have that network set up. So you don't have to go invent that, which is really beautiful. We can support the folks on the ground who are already doing that work. And one thing I always say, if you can't do anything else, is to give a donation to the Carolina Abortion Fund. Do you all know about them? No, okay, so Carolina Abortion Fund, I was on their founding board, I think 10 years ago, and they serve North Carolina and South Carolina. You give them a donation, that money is going to go, most of it's going to go to direct care. People will call the abortion fund saying, hey, I have a procedure, I can't pay for it. They'll say, what do you need? And they will get the money together for that person to get their abortion care. So make a donation to them. I love Planned Parenthood. Alexis McGill Johnson wrote the foreword. I love them, and they just got almost $300 million from Mackenzie Scott, and I'm so happy for them. And the Carolina Abortion Fund is going to serve the folks right here in this community. So if you don't know what else to do, giving a donation to an abortion fund or any abortion fund or the national networks of abortion fund, those are going to help people who might fall through the cracks otherwise. So that's a great thing that you can do. And the other thing is just to be having these kinds of conversations, because what I learned, I never went back to this, but that internalized abortion stigma that I had when I didn't want anyone to think that I was at the abortion clinic to have an abortion, that really requires some deconstruction work and really interrogating, like, where do those beliefs come from? Because we swim in a sea of anti-abortion messaging, just like we swim in a sea of racism and white supremacy language and Christian supremacy. We have to do the work of saying, how have I internalized this, and do I want to make a different decision about how I feel and believe about this and how I act? And so I think one of the best things that you can do is be having these kinds of conversations with people in your life. Maybe it's with your family or your neighbors, just getting practiced in how to talk about this, because abortion stigma and shame keeps people from telling their stories, from accessing care, from speaking out at key moments, kind of in part how we got where we are, because so many people of faith in particular were afraid to talk about this, even though we have this robust history of advocacy and direct engagement with clergy. And I feel like now is a time when people say, I don't want to be quiet anymore. I want to use my voice. I want to be active. And we're so glad. I hope that you too will join the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. We have materials on the back. We have tons of resources. If you're just getting started in this, can connect you. We're hoping to build networks of people kind of similar to the clergy consultation service just for the 21st century that we're in now. So lots of ways for you to get involved individually and collectively as a community. So I just appreciate your time, and I want to have enough time for questions because I know there's a lot going on. So I'm happy to stop there and just say, what would you like to know? What would you like to talk about?
I wonder if you would tell one of your stories.
Sure. This is always a hard one for me to pick one. I always pick a different one. So the one that's sticking out to me now, I'm not sure why, is a woman named Heidi who lives in Ohio, where now she would not be able to get an abortion. She had a history of mental illness. Like when she had her 2 kids, I think after her daughter, she had like a severe psychotic episode, which I'm finding is not uncommon for pregnant people. There is something about the hormonal changes in a pregnant person's body that can cause that, even if they have no pre-existing conditions around it. And she experienced that after she was hospitalized, I think, for a month after that, but loved being a mom. I think her partner at the time was bipolar, and eventually they split. And so she was solo parenting these kids and working in all of this. And so she got a new partner. They got pregnant. She was really excited about it. She had always wanted to have a 3rd baby. She has one now. This is later, but she got pregnant and she started to experience some of those same depressive episodes that she had experienced postpartum with her daughter. And like to the point she couldn't get out of bed, she couldn't go to work. And her partner was very abusive and was using this against her, like really berating her for not being able to function in her life. And she really could not because of what was going on mentally for her. And when she started talking about potentially terminating the pregnancy, because she really was like, I'm not going to be able to survive this. That's how she felt. And what was her truth? And he said, you're going to kill our baby kind of thing. And so she called her mom because she didn't have the money for care, and her mom was able to help her get the money together to have the abortion. And she said immediately after, she could feel her mental state starting to balance out again. Like it was really about the pregnancy hormones. She went to see a friend, and she started to balance it out. And the beautiful thing about Heidi is she has a nonprofit in Ohio that's really about healing. Like she started to study healing on her own, and she is a healer. She's done shamanic healing, and that happened after she went through this experience. And so she does a lot of healing work, and she also does a lot of work specifically for moms who are parenting on their own in Ohio, and has started this beautiful network of care there, of mutual aid. And she told me after the book came out that she and her new partner, were pregnant, and she now has her new baby, the baby that she was supposed to have with this beautiful man. So I don't know why that one is sticking out to me today, but I think it's the mental health issue. I mean, now I know why, because last week I got a call from someone who was in a very similar situation, who's really struggling, who has a wanted pregnancy but is really suffering with her mental health. And she said, do you know anyone else who's been through something like this? And I said, so many people, so it's just helpful to have talked to other people people feel so alone in their decisions, and to be able to say, you're not alone. So many people have gone through this, and your well-being and your health really do matter. And it matters for the kid that you have, that oftentimes it's a parenting decision to terminate a pregnancy so you can care for the children that you have. So that's a little bit about Heidi. She's a beautiful human being in the book. I think I saw another hand. I know, I'm warm too. Is it hot in here? I tend to get warm when I'm talking, but okay. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Yes.
I feel such anger about this issue
Uh-huh.
that sometimes it just
Mm-hmm.
The very idea of somebody would tell me what I can do with my body, just, it sets something off course. I'm just curious how you handle the emotional aspect of your work.
Yeah, thank you. And I honor that, and I hear that. And anger and all emotions are energy in our body, and they got to go somewhere. I mean, they don't just go away if we ignore them. So tending to our emotional lives, I think, is so important, is so connected to the embodiment of this issue, right? And I identify as very empathic, so I do tend to feel not just my own stuff, but I also tend to feel other people's things, which is not a thing that I knew was true about me until recently, and it made so much sense. So for me, I do a lot of processing with people who are feeling similarly. Sometimes I let myself just stay in bed, even though I'm a CEO. I'm like, you know what, today, I'm just not dealing with this. Like, I just need to give myself rest and allow myself to feel the pain and the grief of this, because the work ahead is going to surpass me. And so it is okay for me to be pissed off, or to be depressed, or to not have hope all of the time. I think hope is a communal practice that we can hand off to each other. Like today, I'm not feeling hopeful. Can you hold on to that for me while I go rage? I want to go to one of those rage rooms where you smash all the stuff. I also do a lot of energy work. I do Reiki regularly. I do massage regularly. I do a lot to just honestly cleanse that energy, because I'm getting everybody else's emotions. And honestly, the minute the decision came down, I had reporters calling me. I had no space to process my own feelings. And so it becomes a disciplined practice of really consciously, at the end of the day, I really do cleanse myself energetically so that I can go about my life and be have a joyful life. I feel like it would almost be allowing my opposition to win if this ruined my life. And it's not worth it. I could be doing this work all the time and it wouldn't change anything. So being able to show up fully in a healthy way, in a joyful way. I was at the Wild Goose Festival. I don't know if any of you all went to that. But one of the women in my session was she was like, "You're so cheerful. How are you so cheerful about this?" And I was like, nobody's ever called me that. But I think it's true that what it reflected to me was I am doing my inner work so that when I show up, not all the time, but when I show up, I'm not bogged down in it all the time. I do have an existential hope about this. I don't think this is going to have the last word, but the day-to-day crisis of it does make me mad. So it's holding both of those things. And I didn't say this, but I talk about it in the book too, about theological imagination. I think that's what we do as faith communities. We hold these visions for a world that we haven't seen yet. Isaiah does this beautifully, imagining a world that we could have, that we believe we can co-create with the divine. Holding that vision and then keeping that vision as we take the little steps towards it, I feel is what roots me. Because we have to be holding the vision of what it is we want. We can't just be opposing what we don't want. We have to be reaching towards what we want. And how do we live into those values in the little tiny ways that we do our lives? I gave my whole staff the first week of August off, because we were exhausted. And you would have thought I had walked on water, the way that people respond. I'm you can take time off. You need to take time off if you can do it. So just modeling those ways of rest and joy, that helps me deal with the times when I'm just so angry. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I deal with it. I also make a lot of fun of my trolls too. That helps me too. Yes.
I was kind of reacting to this about the rage, but I was going in the opposite direction. I understand the cleansing yourself and finding your own equilibrium, but I feel we need a megaphone for the rage. We need somebody who is, every time there's a decision that comes out, that it gets broadcast, that this is wrong, that this is not the way we can go, the direction that we can go. And I don't feel that there's enough of that. We get politicians, they go and to the microphone, they say kind of mellow things, this is wrong, but they don't say, and I was going to use a cuss word, this is wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know who it has to be, but somebody needs to be that megaphone. Somebody who can articulate, like you are very good at, but that could consume you. It has to be somebody who probably lives in rage, and does move forward with it. But is there anything like that happening on a national level or even state?
As you were talking, I was thinking of an activist named Adrienne Marie Brown who lives in Durham. If any of you all know her work, Emergent Strategy, but the reason I bring it up is she challenges the idea of the charismatic leader as not a sustainable model, and that really what we should be doing. She likens it to the way that mushrooms grow, that they can populate replicate and populate very quickly and stay connected to each other. And like what I see from my perspective is the cacophony of voices. Maybe not in all the spaces that they need to be, but when I look at the Gen Zers on TikTok, for example, or on social media, like I see that rising, like a collective voice that's rising up. Whether or not the mainstream media covers it is a question, but I definitely see it showing up in innovative ways where I definitely hear it. I will say from my end, this is the first time that the mainstream media has wanted to talk to people of faith who are not anti-abortion about their stances. And that has given me a lot of hope because for the first time, I've had a platform to talk to reporters about the clergy consultation service who've never heard of it. Like they're finally interested. So that gives me a little bit of hope. And I hope that more people are willing to speak out because I think it's in part a skill thing, but also just a numbers thing. And we need people, in every community who are willing to speak up about this. And that's what we're trying to do, is give people the messaging and the courage and the support that they need to use their voices, big or small. Yes.
I really resonate with your frustration with having a conversation with people using scripture around that. And, this past Sunday, I think the lectionary was the 99 sheep and the one lost sheep. And that's a feminist parable. Because women ovulate one egg and then ejaculate a short lived time.
I've never heard it that way.
People don't know how to have creative conversations around hard to understand passages.
That's such a good point.
Something like that story have a implication for what you're talking about.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I really want to read that story again through that lens. I really love that. That's given me something to think about. And I was reflecting on this too because of the environment in which I grew up. There was no emphasis on the historical context of where the scriptures came from. And there's this balancing act that we do around the theological concept of revelation, right? Like that God is revealing God's self through scripture and other things all the time. And so it is a future-focused text in a way, but it's also historically rooted in a particular community. And I think sometimes we emphasize one over the other. But how do we do both? How do we try to have understanding about like what this might have been about in the particular context that it was written? And then are there things that God's revealing to us for our current time, knowing that there's limitations to that? And I think it's those nuanced parts that people have trouble with. And I can say just from my experience, I was taught that basically I knew everything that I needed to know about the Bible just from a handful of things. Like that was what was taught to me. And I was told to just go read the scriptures without any guidance at all and to just pick out the things that resonated for me. So I think there's a lot of biblical illiteracy that I think, folks who either are seminary trained or have done religious studies or have worked on that, they have the knowledge, but it's not always, I don't feel like it's always valued either. I see a real lack of intellectual curiosity. Like, okay, the thing that I put on TikTok, and then it kind of blew up a little bit, not like millions of views, but like hundreds of thousands of views, was I said, I'm so tired of people telling me I don't know anything about the Bible when I went to college and studied it for 4 years, then I went to seminary for 3 years, then I got ordained. I'm so tired of people telling me that I don't know what's in the Bible. And I had this reaction from two groups that sound almost the same, and that is fundamentalist Christians who are anti-intellectual and fundamentalist atheists who told me it was a stupid book. There was like this shared anti-intellectualism around fundamentalism. No matter its form, they sound the same. Fascinating. Thank you for the question and for the interpretation. I'm going to go look up. I think we're at time. I want to just say, I really appreciate you all just letting me show up, because today's one of those days where I'm pissed. So thank you for just letting me show up authentically in my messy self and just being here with me. I really appreciate y'all very, very much, and look forward to staying in conversation with you.
Thank you, Katey. And I'm going to make a decision that the group that's forming in our church, if we could go meet in the library, so that this will give Megan a chance to take down the props or the equipment. I did want to let you all know that our next Tuesday night, and this is an experiment, we're going to keep trying it for 2 months. We're going to hear from Berkeley Hudson, who is a good friend of Binkley. Some of you may know about him, and his wife, Milbree Birch. He has put together a book of work from an African-American photographer, O.N. Pruitt, who lived from 1891 to 1967. He took pictures around Columbus, Mississippi, and it's both stunning and very disturbing. So you see all kinds of images of African-American life that many of us haven't seen, and he's done this beautiful job of giving it context, as we were saying. So I hope you'll come and hear him on the 27th, and blessings as we continue this good work together.